200 death threats in 72 hours. Pam Bondi went on live TV and threatened Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Now the entire Capitol is asking, will justice survive this attack? Police radios crackled outside the Capitol. Barricades guided visitors into narrow lanes while a television truck idled near the dome. On every screen, red headlines repeated the same three words: division, conflict, protests. Every debate in Congress was no longer just words. It felt like a battle for survival. In the marble corridors, footsteps echoed with nervous haste. Phones rang deep into the night. Mailboxes overflowed with chilling death threats. Political violence was no longer a rumor. It had become a haunting presence in every office. At the center of this storm stood Jasmine Crockett, a black congresswoman with sharp eyes and a voice that never trembled. Some respected her for her blunt honesty. Others feared her because she refused to bend. She had walked through storms believing in the law, but now she faced the weight of power itself turning against her. Every new message of hate was a blade pressed closer to her and her team's safety. But who will protect those who dare to speak the truth when power itself becomes the enemy? At 8:12 p.m. Eastern, under the lights of a Fox News set, Pam Bondi adjusted her jacket and faced camera 3. Her tone was deliberate and measured. "If Congress will not restrain its radicals," she declared, "others may have to step in, within the law if necessary." Her tone was sharp, deliberate, each syllable released like an arrow meant to wound, and her target was unmistakable: Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. At first glance, her statements could be dismissed as mere political commentary. Yet beneath the surface, every word carried the weight of authority. Bondi was not just another pundit shouting into the void. She was the former Attorney General, a figure whose title still carried the gravity of law. What she delivered that night was not a casual remark. It was a public warning, veiled in legal language, amplified by the power of her past office, and broadcast to millions. The reaction was immediate and polarizing. Supporters cheered her audacity, claiming she was unafraid to confront what they called radical voices in Congress. They flooded social media with praise, hailing Bondi as a defender of their values. But just as swiftly, waves of outrage crashed back. Critics denounced her as reckless, accusing her of crossing a sacred line by threatening an elected representative of the people. What made the moment so explosive was not simply what she said, but the chilling implication of it. When someone with her history and stature uses a national platform to direct hostility at a sitting congresswoman, it is no longer just rhetoric. It becomes a weapon. The nation was left to wonder, stunned and uneasy, as the line between political theater and dangerous incitement blurred before their eyes. Was this only politics, or had a dangerous boundary just been crossed? Jasmine Crockett faced the microphones without hesitation. She spoke clearly. "Titles do not outrank the Constitution. No one, whether current or former, stands above the law." This was not a passing remark, nor a soundbite for the evening news. It was a declaration of defiance, a line in the sand drawn by a woman who understood that speaking out would come at a cost. For a moment, the air froze. Then came the clash: applause from supporters who saw her as fearless, and jeers from critics who branded her reckless. The media erupted instantly, replaying her words across every channel. Headlines screamed about the confrontation, talk shows dissected her every phrase, and social media lit up with divided fury. Some called her a hero of democracy, others accused her of chasing the spotlight. But to Crockett, none of it mattered. This was no game of vanity. This was survival for herself and for the very principle that laws apply to everyone. The narrator's voice reminds us that this battle is larger than one woman and one opponent. When a congresswoman dares to challenge the specter of power once cloaked in the highest legal authority, it shakes the foundation of America's checks and balances. What began as one televised threat had now ignited a struggle with the system itself. And so the question hung heavy in the air, daring the nation to confront it. What happens when a single woman decides to stand against the entire machinery of power? The storm that began on live television crashed straight into Jasmine Crockett's office like a tidal wave. Phones shrieked without pause, each ring carrying another faceless threat. Inboxes filled with threats. One message read, "We see you leave at 9 o'clock in the evening. Be careful." Another line said, "You will not make it to Friday." The chief of staff saved each message, forwarded them to Capitol Police, and arranged staggered departures for staff. Young staffers huddled around glowing screens, their hands trembling as they read the words that promised death. One assistant, barely out of college, broke down in tears, whispering she was too afraid to walk home alone. Fear settled into the walls, heavy and suffocating, turning a place of public service into a bunker of dread. Crockett walked through it all with her jaw clenched tight, her heels striking the marble like a drumbeat of defiance. She stopped at each desk, laying a steady hand on a shoulder, forcing her team to look up and meet her calm, unblinking eyes. "We will not break," she said, her voice low but unyielding, as though she were willing that strength into existence. Yet even she could feel the chill crawling in. Every message, every voicemail, was a reminder that their enemies were not abstract. They were watching, waiting, and possibly near. The office, once filled with chatter and the scratch of pens, now pulsed with silence, broken only by the next piercing ring. The battle had moved off the television screen and straight into their daily lives. These threats were no longer headlines. They were shadows creeping into every corner, daring Crockett and her staff to falter. And with each passing hour, the question grew heavier, clawing at every heart in the room. Can resolve truly endure when fear seeps into every corner of the office? The storm outside had breached the walls of Jasmine Crockett's private life, dragging her family into the fire. Late one night, as the office lights flickered and another string of death threats buzzed through her phone, she answered a call that shattered her armor. Her mother's voice came as a whisper. "Please, I need you safe. If stepping back keeps you alive, think about it." The line went silent, and Crockett stared at a family photograph on her desk. The words sliced through her harder than any threat written by strangers. Crockett pressed the phone against her ear, her throat burning, unable to answer. Her gaze drifted to the framed photograph on her desk, her mother, her siblings, their smiles frozen in time, unaware that one day their joy would become her battlefield. That image, once a source of comfort, now felt like a fragile window into everything she stood to lose. The silence between her and her mother grew heavier than the chaos outside. Duty clawed at her chest, reminding her of the oath she swore to the people who had trusted her with their voice. But fear whispered another truth. Every step she took forward placed a target not only on her back, but on her family's peace. Could she live with herself if her defiance invited danger to the very people she loved most? Sleep abandoned her, replaced by the relentless push and pull of two unforgiving choices. To retreat would betray her principles, the very fire that had carried her from public defender to Congress. But to continue meant standing in the storm, knowing every lightning strike could scorch her family. In the dead of night, with the Capitol looming outside her window, Crockett clenched her fists, torn but unbroken. The photograph stared back at her, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. And one question thundered louder than the storm itself. What is the true price of standing tall when the tempest threatens to consume everything you love? The ripple effect of Bondi's threat spread like wildfire, consuming every news cycle. Headlines screamed her name, talk shows dissected her every word, and pundits sharpened their knives. The nation's attention had fixed itself on Jasmine Crockett, and there was no turning away. On social media, the battlefield was even bloodier. Hashtags trended in opposite directions. Stand with Crockett surged alongside Silence Her Now. Supporters called her a warrior for justice, while detractors painted her as reckless, radical, and dangerous. The digital noise roared louder with every hour, splitting the public like a crack down the spine of America. In the middle of this storm, Crockett refused to cower. Facing a swarm of cameras, she lifted her chin and declared with unwavering fire, "I will not be silenced." Her voice echoed across television screens and cell phones, not as a plea but as a challenge to those who sought to break her. The declaration electrified her supporters, turning her into a symbol of resistance overnight. Yet symbols come with peril. The higher she rose in the public eye, the sharper the blades drawn against her became. Her defiance had elevated her, but it had also painted a brighter target on her back. And so the question lingered like a shadow across the nation's conscience. How long can a symbol survive before it is crushed under the ruthless machinery of power? Security at the Capitol transformed overnight into a fortress. Every car that approached was stopped and searched. Every envelope was scanned with suspicion, as if even paper could carry death. Metal detectors wailed, and the once bustling hallways now echoed with the heavy presence of armed guards. Inside Crockett's office, the atmosphere thickened with dread. Emails poured in like poisoned arrows, their subject lines laced with racial slurs and threats so vile they left even seasoned staff pale. Each message was a reminder that hatred had a face, a voice, and a chilling determination to silence her. One assistant dropped his phone after reading a particularly venomous note, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Another quietly erased her social media accounts, fearing her family might be targeted next. Fear crawled across the room like smoke, invisible but suffocating, seeping into every conversation and every breath. For Crockett, nights offered no escape. She lay awake in the dark, the glow of her phone lighting up with fresh waves of hostility. Sleep became a stranger. Instead, her mind replayed each insult, each threat, each reminder that enemies lurked in the shadows, closer than anyone dared to admit. Exhaustion carved itself into her face, yet she carried herself with the same fierce determination when daylight returned. Behind her eyes, though, the war raged on, a battle between courage and the creeping terror that she too was only human. The silence of the night made the threats louder, echoing like footsteps in an empty hall. And so the question pressed against her every waking moment, as sharp and relentless as the threats themselves. How does one keep fighting when fear itself becomes a constant companion? The threats outside were vicious, but what cut deepest came from within the very walls of Congress. A junior party whip, pressured by donors and a difficult election map, passed a damaging quote to a friendly blog. By morning, headlines labeled Jasmine Crockett a radical troublemaker fueling the fire already raging around her. Suddenly, allies who once stood proudly at her side began to shrink into silence. In meetings, their eyes avoided hers. In corridors, their voices dropped to murmurs when she passed. Fear of political fallout had chained their loyalty, leaving Crockett isolated in the very institution meant to safeguard justice. The betrayal spread like poison. Each news segment replayed her image not as a defender of democracy, but as a caricature of defiance gone too far. Support eroded. Friends vanished. She became a storm unto herself, standing alone against not only threats from beyond, but daggers from within. Late one night, she sat in her office, the room swallowed by shadows. Papers lay scattered across her desk, headlines screaming her downfall, and for the first time, tears slipped quietly down her face. The weight of solitude pressed harder than any insult or threat could, but then her eyes caught the worn copy of the Constitution on her shelf. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out her oath card, creased from years of use. Her own signature marked the promise to support and defend. It was a thin piece of paper, but it carried weight. Strength returned, fragile yet burning. The tears dried, leaving behind not weakness, but resolve sharpened by betrayal. Still, one haunting truth refused to leave her mind. Is the greatest enemy the one outside, or the betrayal that festers within? The walls of Congress might have closed in on her, but outside those marble corridors, something else was happening. Jasmine Crockett stepped into churches, school gyms, and crowded town halls, where fear gave way to faith. The moment she entered, people rose to their feet, their applause thunderous, their eyes wet with gratitude. An elderly woman clutched her hand tightly, whispering through tears, "You are our hope. Don't let them silence you." In that simple plea, Crockett felt the weight of generations, the struggles, the scars, the unbroken resilience of those who had come before her. Children ran up to her with notebooks, asking for autographs not as a celebrity, but as proof that courage could be real. In one meeting, a teenager with trembling hands handed her a note. "If you give up, who will we have left?" The words pierced her deeper than any threat, a reminder that her fight had become the torch others clung to in the dark. She realized then that this battle was no longer hers alone. Every insult hurled at her echoed through the lives of those she represented. Every threat against her body was a warning to the entire community. Standing tall wasn't just defiance, it was survival for all who looked to her as their shield. And so in the roar of applause, in the quiet of whispered prayers, Crockett found her strength renewed. Her cause had expanded beyond the halls of Congress, into the beating heart of the people themselves. Yet the question remained, sharper than ever. When an entire community pins its hope on a single warrior, can she ever afford to fall? Pam Bondi's voice did not fade after the first strike. It grew sharper, echoing across television screens with venom. Night after night, her words painted Jasmine Crockett as dangerous, reckless, unfit. The narrative was twisted until Crockett's name became a weapon wielded against her. One envelope looked ordinary. Inside was a photograph of her street with the timestamp cut away and 3 words in block letters. Nice porch light. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic, but the thread it carried was precise and merciless. That night, Crockett stood by her window, staring at the quiet street outside. Every parked car became a question mark, every shifting shadow a possible enemy. What once felt like the safety of home now pulsed with the dread of an unseen hunter. Her heart pounded as she imagined footsteps in the dark, eyes watching from corners she could not see. For the first time, the fight felt less like politics and more like survival, a war that had invaded the sacred space of her private life. She pressed her palms against the glass, trying to steady herself. The community had called her a symbol, a warrior, but symbols could bleed and warriors could fall. Alone in that moment, she wondered if her courage was enough to shield not just herself, but everyone she loved. And so the question clawed at her, merciless and unavoidable. Is justice truly worth the price when the cost may be life itself? The day arrived when Jasmine Crockett could no longer remain silent within the very chamber that was built to uphold justice. She rose from her seat and crossed the marble floor. In the center of the house, she said, "No one stands above the law." Applause came from some rows, silence from others. Cameras captured both. The words cracked through the air like lightning, forcing every head to turn. Some members rose to their feet, clapping fiercely, their applause ringing like gunfire in defense of principle. Others remained stone-faced, their jaws tight, their eyes narrowed with disdain. The divide was written across their faces, each expression a battlefield of loyalty and fear. Cameras zoomed in, broadcasting every flicker of emotion to millions of homes across America. Families at dinner tables, workers on lunch breaks, elders in nursing homes, all paused to listen. It was no longer just a speech, it was a challenge hurled at the heart of power itself. The air grew dense, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Allies whispered encouragement, enemies muttered curses, but Crockett did not waver. She repeated her vow, her words hammering against the very foundation of the chamber, daring anyone to deny her truth. When she finally stepped back, the applause and hostility collided into a deafening storm. Across the nation, television screens flickered with her defiance, sparking fierce debates in living rooms and on street corners alike. For one electrifying moment, the entire country seemed suspended between hope and doubt. And as the echoes of her voice still lingered in the chamber, one question loomed like a shadow over history itself. Will this voice carry through time, or will it be swallowed by the silence of forgetting? The stage was set, the lights blazing down, and the nation held its breath. Across from Jasmine Crockett, Pam Bondi spoke first. "Selective enforcement undermines due process," she argued. "You are criminalizing disagreement." Crockett leaned forward. "Disagreement is protected speech. Intimidation is not. The law already knows the difference," but Crockett did not flinch. She leaned forward, her voice raw yet commanding, each word striking not as rhetoric but as truth. Then came the line that pierced the screen and seared into the conscience of the country. "Justice is not a privilege for the wealthy. It is a promise to us all." The studio fell into a hush, the silence heavier than any gavel. Bondi's rebuttals rang cold, technical, and distant, while Crockett's words reached into living rooms, kitchens, and hearts. Viewers leaned closer to their screens, torn between admiration and fury, as if the nation itself was on trial. Across America, Reactions split like lightning striking an old tree. Half the country erupted in anger, calling her reckless, dangerous, unfit. The other half wept openly, claiming they had finally heard a voice that spoke for them, a voice that refused to bow. By the debate's end, no minds had been left untouched. Crockett had not merely faced Bondi, she had forced the nation to confront its reflection, with all its fractures laid bare. And as the cameras cut to black, one question burned brighter than the stage lights themselves. Had America just witnessed a turning point, or the deepening of its most dangerous divide? The storm finally began to subside. A week later, after sponsors objected to the threats dominating her segments, Bondi quietly left the schedule. She offered no apology, only absence. Her absence from the stage was not surrender, but the kind of quiet that leaves everyone wondering when the next strike might come. Inside Crockett's camp, the shift was palpable. For the first time in weeks, the phone stopped ringing with threats, and inboxes no longer spilled over with venom. Staffers exhaled in relief, their shoulders dropping from a tension that had become second nature. Yet behind their forced smiles lingered the shadows of sleepless nights and trembling hands. Crockett herself carried the weight differently. She stood taller, yes, but the scars were etched deep within. Every insult, every betrayal, every letter promising violence. They had not broken her body, but they had left a mark on her soul. Even as she walked through the Capitol with her head high, she knew the echo of fear would never fully leave. The cameras moved on, the headlines shifted, but the memory of the storm clung like smoke after fire. To the public, she was stronger than ever, a symbol who survived the onslaught. But in the quiet moments, the cost was undeniable. Survival had become the only measure of victory. And so one haunting question lingered in the silence that followed. In the fight for justice, is simply surviving already a triumph? In the weeks that followed, Jasmine Crockett's name no longer carried the echo of threats. It carried the weight of hope. Crowds gathered in church basements, city parks, and school auditoriums, holding signs that read, "Our torch will not be extinguished." To them, she was no longer just a congresswoman. She was the flame that refused to bow to the storm. The press could not ignore the transformation. Some commentators reached for civil rights comparisons. The history was different, but the instinct to stand firm in a moment of pressure felt familiar. Newspapers framed her as a symbol of modern resistance, a woman who dared to say aloud what others only whispered. Her defiance was no longer just a moment in politics. It was history in motion. Young people especially clung to her story. Students wrote her letters filled with gratitude. Teachers assigned her speeches in classrooms, and parents told their children about the woman who stood when others fell silent. Crockett had become more than a politician. She had become the embodiment of possibility. Yet the weight of being a symbol was immense. With every cheer came the pressure of expectation, the knowledge that slipping, even once, could dim the light she carried. She was no longer fighting for herself alone. She was carrying the hopes of millions who had placed their faith in her strength. And so, as her image spread beyond the headlines and into the hearts of ordinary Americans, one question lingered like a spark on dry kindling. Can a single flame truly ignite the path for an entire generation? Jasmine Crockett's battle is not just the story of one congresswoman. It is the reflection of every struggle against power that seeks to silence truth. And as her journey reaches its close, the question no longer belongs to her. It belongs to you. When the darkness of power knocks at your door, will you remain silent or will you rise and stand? The measure of a democracy is not in its laws, but in the courage of those who defend them. Her courage lit the spark. But keeping that fire alive, that rests in your hands. If this story mattered to you, do not let it disappear. Like, share, and subscribe. That is how these voices continue. This story is for educational and storytelling purposes only. It aims to inspire awareness, reflection, and dialogue.